Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lookout. I know it's been a little while. California has been pretty slow fire-wise for last month or so. It's been nice, give us all a chance to catch up a little on everything else. So we've got a fire going now that it's called the Shoe Fire. So we're going to talk about the Shoe Fire, and we don't have a lot of intel specifically on the Shoe Fire, but the Shoe Fire is burning in an interesting area. And it brings up interesting kind of conversation about bigger picture of managing land in California, managing forest land, managing timberland, managing carbon. This fire is burning in a place that is kind of a microcosm of a lot of the issues we face in trying to change our relationship with fire in California. All these places, all these conversations that we have about fire and about how to manage fire, they all need to be rooted specifically in the place we're talking about. So, there's going to be ways that we might try to manage a fire burning where the Shoe Fire is burning, which we would never try to do with a fire that's burning near Downeyville or Alta or closer to major population centers. So I just want to put that out there that oftentimes, we talk about land management in these generalities. Oh, we need to let more fires burn, or we should let more lightning fires burn, or we should put out every fire. And the situation is really nuanced just about anywhere you work. The context is defined by the geography, the land management history, the ownership, the weather patterns of that particular part of the state. And so I'd say don't ever take anything I say about a specific place or a specific fire and try to represent it. I'm saying that about the entire state. The state of California is like half the size of the east coast of the United States. So we have a lot of variety here. We have a lot of different fire environments. But I'm going to try to be kind of specific to this particular area here that we're talking about of the Shoe Fire. So let's just kind of jump right in here. Second here. Got too many lookout banners. There we go. All right, so what are we talking about? We're talking about the Shoe Fire here. This is burning in the area between kind of Round Mountain and Montgomery Creek on Highway 299 and Lakehead on I-5. This is called Squaw Creek, this drainage here, and it's the kind of major drainage between the McCloud River and the Pit River. So Lake Shasta has kind of three major arms. It's got the Sacramento arm that goes up the upper Sacramento River. It's got the McCloud arm that goes up the McCloud River up to the town of McCloud, and it's got the Pit arm that goes up and up the Pit River up towards Bernie. And in between, there's this Squaw Creek arm. And that's a really interesting part of the state. I got to go on a bike tour a couple years ago where we took off from down here in Jones Valley, and we rode up the Backbone Ridge up to Round Mountain and dropped down and came across Fender's Ferry Road, which is the main kind of county road that goes across from Round Mountain over across the McCloud and ends up over here by Lakehead. But it's a really wild part of California. There's hardly anyone living out in here, and it's kind of a unique forest type in that it's had a lot of hot fire in the past. It's got a lot of kind of oak woodland. It's got quite a bit of timber, but kind of when you get in closer look at it, there's a lot of oak in here. And so I also want to talk about kind of the big picture of this area. And there's some really interesting things I think happening here from a wildlife perspective. A lot of deer hunting up here, and I just think it's a good spot to talk about some big picture stuff. So here we go. We'll start with the fire. The fire itself started down here near the Madrone campground on Fender's Ferry Road. So Fender's Ferry Road, it comes up from the pit. Let's see. Down here, Fender's Ferry drops down from Round Mountain, and it crosses a bridge here on this the lowest dam. There's a dam here on the pit, and then Fender's Ferry cruises up this Bear Creek Valley, and it goes over this divide here and drops down to Madrone Campground on Squaw Creek. And so the fire started kind of, I think, on the downhill side of the road between Squaw Creek and Fender's Ferry Road. And it quickly kind of burned up on this side, but it's looking north. The fire's mainly spread to the north. So yesterday afternoon, around 3, it had started kind of running up to the north, and you can see all these little spots. It's been hot and dry, and so this fire, as it's kind of made these little slope-driven runs, it was spotting all over the place. And so the satellites showed reaching the kind of the top of the ridge and kind of being about 1,200 acres last night. By about 2 a.m., they had night flying helicopters on it last night, and then smoke kind of settled down into the canyon. It sounds like they couldn't really use the helicopters after about 11:30. So they've got a fire where they've got pretty poor access. There's not a lot of roads. It doesn't do you much good to get fire engines back in here because there's just not much that's reachable on this fire. So they need hand crews, and they're hitting it hard with aircraft. For the morning, a lot of it's probably going to be socked in under smoke, and the fire, they won't be able to really get on it too aggressively until some of that smoke lifts out. And then it's kind of, it'll be more active on the upper slopes. But when we look at kind of the rivers, ridges, and roads, as far as like the box that they have to keep this thing in, they don't have a lot of great options here. They've got kind of a major ridge system to the north. They've got this main ridge system here. But the problem with all that is that it takes a long time to prep. Like for an indirect attack, it takes a long time to prep and fire a fire line. And that's what it's going to take. For indirect attacks, they're going to have to, they can establish some fire line in here and they can fire off of it. The question is, do they have time to do that before the fire makes a slope-driven run out there and pushes the line? I mean, some of these things are just a matter of logistics, of taking a couple of days to figure out like how you're going to get the crews in there safely, how you're going to walk dozers in, and everything else. So they've got kind of a big box already kind of defined for this fire. I haven't really seen any maps of that, but you kind of look at your major ridge systems. But the good thing that they've got going is that the heat wave we've been having just broke, and the nighttime humidities are quite high, and the nighttime temperatures are quite low. And so we're really moving into this weather scenario where this is actually kind of ideal prescribed burning weather that we're moving into. As you get farther north from this fire, you see this this kind of scar, this checkerboard scar. We're going to talk a lot about this. This is the Bagley fire from 2012. And you can see that within that Bagley fire scar, there's this checkerboard of salvage logging and unsalvaged areas. There's not a lot of other fires in this area that are going to have changed the fuel type. Like this fire is from 1932. You've got the Hers fire out on the other side of the McCloud River, which that's now been 6 years. So you got Hers and Bagley, and those are the two main fires you've got. We've also got the Fountain fire over here that we'll talk about a little bit later, which is 1992, which probably is not something that's going to come into play in this one, but it's still part of this kind of bigger picture story. So we've got I-5 over here, 299 over here, the Bagley fire. So let's talk a little about Bagley. Bagley's 2012, and if you look at Facebook, let's see what we got here. We've got the Bagley fire here. This is 2019. If we go back to 2012, you see that in 2013, after the Bagley fire, you can see that checkerboard where they salvaged. And then by like 2019, they're growing trees out here. They sprayed all the brush in the private lands. And also by 2019, you can see this is the scar of the Hers fire. And this is a Delta fire in the car. So in 2018, everything over on this side of I-5 burned in a kind of a massive fire year. Like here's Redding, here's the car fire, here's the Delta fire, and Hers fire. Delta on this side, Hers over here. So what I want to talk about there real quick is severity. So our fire's burning out in here. You've got, this is the HERS fire, right? So when you first look on a map at this fire, you see that there's this polygon of blue that covers this whole area. And people are always kind of prone to saying like, oh, the HERS fire, like 40,000 acres, it devastated 40,000 acres of timberland, right? That's what we hear. Fire's now scorched, 40,000 acres. But when you look at the actual severity of where the fire burned hot and didn't burn hot, this red are places that it like burned hot, like burned down to kind of black sticks, mineral soil. So you can see a lot of hers didn't burn severely, right? It, like a lot of this area that burned got what we would call good fire. Now there's private timberland in this burn scar, and private timberland managers, they have a different definition of good fire. They generally don't want any fire on their landscape, and they fight hard for CAL FIRE and other folks to keep the fire as small as possible when it's threatening their landscapes. Forest Service manages their land for something other than timber production, and so they often are all right with a bigger box, and often a bigger box is what it takes to contain a big backcountry fire. Like if you look at this country where hers burned, like it's freaking rough. And you know, if the fire's burning down in here, you might not be able to go get it. You might be having to back off to this ridge. So this all, how does this all relate back to the shoe fire? Well, the Forest Service has kind of proven to be incapable of really managing their lands. They're not really running a timber sale program anymore. They're stuck in kind of these environmental death spirals of writing huge environmental reports. And in the meantime, before they can get anything done, we have these big fires that are doing the work for us. And we have to accept that that's kind of the reality of the scale of the problem, is that it's, for the Forest Service, like actually getting enough work done on the ground to like keep a fire from, I mean, when we look at the whole landscape, we're not going to thin and log and like prescribe burn our way out of the current problems we've got. So in my opinion, a fire like the HERS fire is a good outcome, because you got fire back into this landscape that needs it, that requires it to kind of exist. And when you look at where you had high severity, a lot of that was brush before the fire. Like if we look back at, say, 2017. So when we look at this severity map of where the HERS fire burned hot, almost all of it is places that were brush before anyway. And brush is supposed to burn hot. And where we had timber in the HERS fire, for the most part, this green, the red is the only place where the trees are all gone or it's bare. So 40,000 acres of the HERS fire, and like probably like 35,000 acres of that was good fire. A lot of the places where the fire behavior was stuff we didn't want in HERS was places on private land where it's been clear cut and it's all open to the sun, and there was slash and other things. Like if you look at the kind of timber harvest history map out here on private lands, and then you look at the severity of the HERS fire, like a lot of the burn that was bad in HERS was because it was burning in land that had been kind of opened up to sun and full of slash from logging. And I've got, you know, this isn't just me making this up. I've been out there, and like, this is just kind of, this is the situation, right? So when we look over here at Bagley, the Bagley fire and the kind of post-fire salvage there, what we see is is 2016, so this is 4 years after it burned. So we see the private lands, they clear cut, salvage logged, and herbicided, and then they've replanted trees out there. And this is it's what it's called checkerboard land ownership, right? So this is a legacy of the history of the West. So every other section out here is owned by private timberland companies, and then every other section from that is owned by public Forest Service. So you've got these kind of radically different management programs right next to each other. You've got the Forest Service, which their timber program's kind of defunct, and they don't have much money to do anything else except fight fires, and so they didn't do anything. The fire burned on their lands, and mixed severity, and they didn't do anything. They just left it alone. Sierra Pacific Industries, their job is to maximize the amount of timber and profit they make off their land, so they had a real incentive to cut all the trees that had burned right away. And then they, some of these areas, they just kind of cleaned it up as much as they could, and then they herbicided it, and they planted new trees. So that's like, this checkerboard is a big part of the story in this area. The reason we have checkerboard here is because the Southern Pacific Railroad got built down kind of from Klamath Falls down through Mount Shasta, Dunsmuir, down Sacramento River Canyon to Redding. 1800s maybe, I'm not sure. But development of the West, encouraging the railroads to build their railroads. The one thing the feds had to give away was lots of land. This was kind of Homestead Act days. They just surveyed all this land. And they said to the railroads, hey, if you build your railroad, we'll give you a ton of land in payment for that service that you're doing to the entire kind of development of the continent, development of the American empire. So the legacy of that is the railroads still owned a lot of this land going into the 20th century, and then they, over time, have sold it to major timber companies like Louisiana Pacific or Georgia Pacific or other kind of multinational large companies. And over time, Sierra Pacific Industries in California has consolidated a lot of those historic large corporate timber land ownings. So now SPI owns a ton of this checkerboard. So this is a problem for managing fire on the landscape, because this fire is going to end up being kind of 50% belonging to Sierra Pacific and 50% belonging to the Forest Service. And they've got such different management outlooks, right? So SPI doesn't want their land to burn. Forest Service, like, they recognize that there's going to be a lot of ecological benefit to this fire burning. It's burning in a lot of oak. Like, when you look at this imagery here, you can really see like the conifer versus the oak / chaparral. And oak forest isn't really harmed for the most part by fire. It's kind of reset and it all sprouts back. So as far as like managing this land, like for a lot of us kind of fire ecology types, like I would be fine with this entire landscape burning right now. If this fire ended up burning all the way out to the McCloud River and all the way down to Shasta Lake and to the Pitt River over the next month, I would be happy. I would be freaking stoked, because what else are we going to do with this land? The Forest Service is not going to do anything with this land. There's hardly any timber worth taking anymore. Most of the timber that was worth taking out here has been kind of mined out of the landscape over the last 60 years. And this is oaks, and this is wildland, and there's just about no one living out here. And it's incredible habitat for deer and all kinds of wildlife. And there's just no other real option. Like, we're not going to probably come out here and like do a 30,000 acre prescribed fire. It'd be great if we could, but that's not going to happen. So if a wildfire is going to do it for us, I'd be stoked. However, I'm not a forester working for SPI, and SPI is the last thing they want. They've taken a lot of losses, and their land in general is less fire resilient than the surrounding Forest Service land because of the way they've managed it. I'd say specifically when we talk about where they've already logged. A lot of the land out here is fairly indistinguishable between the private and the public timberland as far as the stocking and everything else. But when you get into areas where they've intensively managed like where they've put a huge investment into replanting the Bagley fire, like, yeah, they don't want the fire to burn in here. So this is a real problem, right? Like if I'm a prescribed burn boss for the Forest Service, and I decide I want to come out here and, like if you look at these lands that burned in Bagley on the public lands, 2012, 12 years later, like this would be a great time to burn this. To, put a ridgetop line in here and backfire down through the chaparral and clean up this 12-year-old burn. The trees that survived before, a lot of this got a good understory clean out. And it's like, now is the time to put fire back in this landscape. But if I'm the Forest Service burn boss, like I can't really do that because like it's almost impossible for me to like put in a mid-slope control line and then burn right up to this SPI clear cut that's now got its own kind of brush and other fuel loading. Like if we look at current conditions on the SPI, they've come in and they've thinned their plantations and they've got like all this red slash out here from the little baby trees they cut down because they had to plant a lot more trees than they probably wanted to. And so you've got pre-commercial thinning slash in here. You've got the steep gully, you've got brush. And so it's just basically you've got these like little 1 mile chunks of Forest Service that are basically unmanageable with fire because the neighbor's not with the program, right? So when you extend that out to the whole landscape, you can see how it's like if the Forest Service, if one of the only reasonable tools they have for managing fire or managing vegetation at the landscape scale is to let fires burn, like that's not going to happen just about anywhere where we got this checkerboard. All right. So back to this fire and what's going to happen with it. I want to talk a little more about the checkerboard. I worked on the HERS fire in 2018. I wasn't out there. Usually, in the past when I worked on fires, I've been been a contractor on the incident command team, doing the mapping. On this one, I was unaffiliated with the team. I was kind of out there looking at stuff with a private forester on private land, and in that case, that company was pushing hard on CAL FIRE to get the Forest Service to change their approach because the Forest Service's approach on HERS was to build a big box and proceed with kind of a firing plan. So their big box was like, hey, we're going to take it to the river, we're going to build some other indirect line, but we're going to like fire this whole area. And once they kind of started on that plan, then they had like, 10 or 14 day kind of work plan of how that was going to happen. And unfortunately for my friend's company, his company had just clear cut. They just finished clear cutting one of these units out here, and the logs were still in the clear cut, and the fire was burning. The Forest Service was going to fire off this ridge, and eventually the entire clear cut area was going to be inside the final fire perimeter, but it hadn't burned yet. And so they were pushing hard, like, hey, can you guys kind of hold off firing this for a few more days so we can haul some of these logs out of this clear cut? But it wasn't really like the Forest Service was on a timed kind of tactical plan. Like, hey, we're going to fire this today, we're going to fire that tomorrow. And so CAL FIRE actually pushed some dozer line out in the middle of that, saying like, hey, we think you could hang it up here. And then the Forest Service fire teams got to their dozer line. They just kept going. And anyway, there was an enormous amount of political pressure during the HERS fire applied by the private timber companies via calls to Congress, calls to the governor to go direct on this fire and make a smaller box. And so the firefighters kind of get screwed because they make a plan, they start doing it, and then they're getting calls from the governor like, hey, you need to go direct here, you need to go indirect, you got to keep this smaller. We know you've got a plan, but SPI doesn't want you to burn their clear cuts up. One thing that happened during this fire also was some of my coworkers were out here putting in indirect line as part of this aggressive approach to keep the fire from getting to more private timber land. And they got hit by a giant boulder that was rolled by a dozer above them. And two of my coworkers got flown out in a helicopter because they got hit by this like 5 foot tall boulder, and they're lucky they didn't die. So there's this abstract notion of like, indirect versus direct attack, and that direct attack is better because it minimizes acres burned. But when you fire more aggressively, you put more people in harm's way. It's mixed because here they are putting in an indirect line, like a contingency line even. But I guess I'm trying to say that there's consequences. Like if you say like, no, we got to go more aggressive, we got to get in here and put the fire out smaller. Like there's actually like human beings that have to go out and make that happen. And oftentimes the indirect box was made because the ops folks were like, no, we're not going to put people down in that hole. That's not, the risk versus gain is not worth it. Right. So risk versus gain means different things to an operations chief versus a timberland manager. Right. So that's the kind of conundrum with the checkerboard is there's going to be a lot of pressure on a fire like this to go direct and keep it as small as possible, but it might not be possible given the resources available and everything else to go direct on this fire and put it out. It might be because the weather's changing, but a lot of that's just going on in the background. So what I want to talk about moving on from there is Prop 4, which is on the California ballot. Let me just pull something up about Prop 4 here. All right. So Prop 4 coming up authorizes $10 billion in general obligation bonds for water, wildfire prevention, and protection of communities and lands. $400 million annually for 40 years to repay the bond. Supporters are CAL FIRE, firefighters, Clean Water Action, Wildlife Federation, Nature Conservancy. Opponents are the Taxpayers Association. So $10 billion. So there's a bunch of stuff in here for wildfire prevention, thinning, burning, and there's some money in here also for what's called 30 by 30. They want to conserve an additional 6 million acres of lands in California to reach goals of conserving 30% of California's land mass as conservation ownership by 2030. So what do I think about Prop 4? Prop 4 would create a lot of work for people like me, consultants and prescribed fire instructors and everything else. It's in my professional interest to vote for it because it's going to rain grant money for wildfire mitigation and education and everything else. On the flip side, I feel like a lot of the money we're spending right now on wildfire mitigation is kind of not really addressing the root problem. The root problem is we've got too many people, we've got too many constraints on where we can let fires burn. We've got a state that's built on these kind of fractured foundations or bad. We've got a bad setup here for managing this land. Say the Forest Service, if the Forest Service wants to kind of manage this land for resilience, they have to let fires burn. They have to do big burns. We're not going to. So a problem with a lot of the state-funded wildfire mitigation work right now is that it's really piecemeal. We're getting money to train landowners, and we're doing a 5-acre burn or a 10-acre burn. Someone's getting money and they're doing a 20-acre roadside thinning. But we've got millions and millions of acres of land that needs fire on a frequent basis. And so, to me, dumping another $10 billion into these same programs that don't really address the root problems, it's not great policy. So when we talk about spending money to acquire conservation lands to get 30% land conserved by 2030, the problem with that is that everyone's talking about spending money to buy land, but no one's talking about how they're going to manage that land. How do so say there's some private land down here and you were able to spend $20 million of taxpayer money to buy this land and manage it. Well, what are you going to do? It's steep, it's nasty. You're not going to go out there and thin it by hand or mechanically thin it or anything else. You need to burn it. But if it's surrounded by private timberlands that are not fire resilient, it's going to be impossible to really manage this land. So I guess one of my questions is is it worth spending billions of dollars to buy conservation land if you physically can't manage it? So when I think of 30 by 30, I think if we had, if I had a couple $1 billion to spend tomorrow on land conservation, I would say, hey, why don't you buy all this SPI land? Just buy it. Give them what they want. Make it national forest. And then let's let this all burn. Right? That's how you manage it. And that's how you actually achieve meaningful conservation. But if that program's just going to like buy up a couple little parcels here and there in places where we can't meaningfully manage them because we're still hand tied by this, 130-year-old land ownership footprint, then Prop 4 is a waste of money unless we really start like, hey, let's get radical about the root causes of our problems. Another thing I wanted to talk about here, just real quick in this landscape that kind of ties in when you talk about landscape scale, kind of conservation and everything else, is check out Lake Shasta here, Shasta Lake. When this lake went in, it drowned all these lowlands, right? So here's Shasta Dam down here. If you can picture this landscape without a dam, you would have like right now, this hill up here is like 2,500 feet. And then down at the dam, it's like 600 feet below the dam, right, in elevation. So when you think of how deer use landscapes, the deer, they come out of the high country in the fall, and they go down to the low country. And they do that by going down the rivers. So when they put in Shasta Dam here, they basically kind of landlock these deer. Like if these deer up here want to get down to, say it's getting cold and winter's coming and the deer want to get down to the low country, like they can't get there. They used to just like go downstream and go down the river, and then they're down here in frickin' Redding like 2 days later, 3 days later. Well, now they can't do that. They aren't going to swim across the lake, I don't think. So what are they going to do? Are they going to like walk around mountain and come down this way? Yeah, I guess maybe they are now. They have to. But there's these kind of landscape scale patterns like that where like during the droughts in 1970s, there were deer, like mass starvations of deer out here because they ran out of food up here in the winter and they couldn't get down to the low country. So when we talk about, do they swim across Lake Shasta? Like, I'm curious. If so, that's cool. Anyway, just big picture, like deer follow fire. And so by excluding fire from this landscape where this fire is burning, we're degrading, over time, over the last 50 years, if you look at the fire history layer, we've like substantially degraded, like none of this land out here has had a fire in like 100 years. The way that we would kind of restore fire habitat or deer habitat out here is to let fires burn. The park fire burned a lot of area that hadn't burned for like the last 30 years. Super beneficial for deer. Short-term impacts, yeah, but like the Dixie fire, these places are coming back in like super banquet style. All right. So anyway, that's my kind of soapbox on like Prop 4 and spending big money on conservation. Is like, let's think big. Let's not just keep spending our money on like a little piecemeal fuel break here, a little bit of training over here. Let's think about the big picture. If you want to spend billions of dollars and conserve big chunks of land, please tell me up front how you're going to manage it. Other thing I want to talk about is someone says, could I post some of my talking points surrounding Prop 4? Yeah, I'll put that on the lookout. So after my last Dixie Fire deer hunting video, got some comments that I was kind of like preachy and long-winded, and people didn't quite understand what I was getting at. Got an outline today, but I'm still kind of ranting, I know. Kind of interesting to look at this. out here, all this clear cuts on private land. It's just such a departure from the big picture thinking that, I think that's why it's important to consolidate. Like private land, there's definitely a place for private timberland to grow timber and everything else. But if we're gonna have wildlands and they're gonna be manageable, this checkerboard's kind of a disaster. It's not good for anyone. It's not good for the private timber company because they've got to put up with fires burning off the Forest Service onto their land. It's not good for the Forest Service because they've got to try to keep fires from burning onto the private land. It's not good for the firefighters because you hear that this fire's in unified command, and what that means basically is that nobody's happy. Unified command almost always means that you've got these conflicts that are designed into the fabric of the landscape that are making it really difficult for the ICs and the agency reps and everyone else to get along at all because they've got such hugely different kind of political pressures upon them. So what's the fire actually doing? That's yesterday. These guys aren't looking at the fire anymore. Let's look at Round Mountain. This is the fire this morning. You can see all the smoke kind of laying down in the canyons, kind of inversion, and there's like little bits of the fire that are above the inversion. I'd expect that this fire is going to make some runs similar to what we saw yesterday. This afternoon, kind of when the inversion lifts out and we get down into lower humidities, we've got our weather forecast for today is that the humidities are going to start to kind of drop around 11 a.m. and they'll bottom out here like 2 to 6 into the 20s, which that's good burning weather. But all in all, what I'd say is like these weather conditions we're seeing right now are like prescribed fire prescriptions. Under 80 degrees, RH above 25, like that's a good prescription for an underburn. And the outlook here is that our minimum temps at night are going to be down in the 40s. RHs are coming way up at night. So this fire every night is going to lay down. Once they get hand crews on this, they're going to be able to go direct on a lot of this kind of oak litter because it's going to be behaving, at least in places where it's backing downhill or flanking, because it's going to be behaving by like a prescribed fire. It's a good fire at this point, right? So if you look at kind of this these conditions across the course of a day, what that tells you is that that's the reason that you end out in this country with a severity pattern that looks like the HERS. Is that, if we're going to have, 70 or 80% of our fire are going to burn with beneficial severity, is because 70%, 80% of the time of the day that the fire is burning is in these prescribed fire type conditions. So this fire, you're going to have some runs that are slope driven in the kind of the heat of the day. But like right now, this fire's already kind of run out of slope, right? Like it ran to the top of the mountain, and now just about every flank of this fire, this side's burning in the shade, and it got to the top of the little hill here. This fire's backing down the backside. It's at the ridge here. It's backing down. So like in general, almost all the aspects of this fire are either backing or flanking at this point. And so, yeah, maybe today, in the heat of the day, the fire will get established in here, and it might run this drainage here. But then when it does that, it's going to be backing down on the shady side of the hill. It's going to be backing down in here. So all in all, when I say, like, hey, let these fires burn, I'm not saying, like, hey, I want this whole landscape to burn hot. It's just that the nature of the weather at this time of year, with the long shadows, long nights, cool overtime temperatures, this is basically a prescribed burn at this point. It's just that nobody's out there kind of coaxing it along. But what you could do right now if you didn't have private land all over the place is you could come out here and you could drop ping pong balls along these ridges and let the fire back off of it for the next month. Obviously, one of the things that's kind of bitten people about that approach is that if in that time you've got like a 5-day east wind event, that's bad news. But on the other hand, you've got over here this whole HERS fire scar, right? Which is not going to carry kind of extreme fire behavior. In some ways, it's ready for another burn, right? It burned 6 years ago. This area's got a fire return interval of kind of like 5 to 15 years. So when we look at the big picture, when I say looking at the big picture, the effects of this fire are going to be overall highly beneficial unless you're a timber landowner that has a bunch of little trees. Like obviously, if the fire gets up into here and starts burning through SPI's plantations, even then it might not really hurt them too much. But if they do have a lot of like pre-commercial thinning slash laying around, it might be bad for them. But I'd say personally, like I'm rooting for this fire. I'd like to see this fire burn 30,000 acres. I'd be happy if 2 weeks from now, a month from now, this fire's burned this whole area, because it's going to be highly beneficial to this forest. It's going to be beneficial to the wildlife. Fire's good. So I'm always a bit disappointed when they like get in here and like, oh, the fire laid down and we got in there, we went direct and we put it out. Like I'm not going to be thanking the Forest Service for that. I'm not going to be thanking CAL FIRE for that, because I want to see. I'm rooting for this fire. Anyway, there you go. Thanks for supporting the Lookout. We did a little feature yesterday on our website about this fire. This is kind of our initial assessment, and it's got a lot of what I already talked about. Talks about the checkerboard ownership, and it's got a PowerPoint in here that I did for the NorCal Botany Symposium back in 2020, I think. And it just talks about this legacy of the railroads and how we're making a lot of progress on using fire at the landscape scale to achieve resource benefits, including some of that fire being intentionally hot. But just how this pattern of land ownership really makes that impossible. There's some of the, when I was talking about pre-commercial slash in clear cuts, this is just kind of like a way that traditionally they've planted a lot of trees and then they come back and they thin them, and for a couple of years there's a lot of slash in there. Creates problems. Eventually that slash goes away. But that pre-commercial thinning slash, while it's out there, can create a real kind of heavy fuel bed that makes survivorship of trees in plantations a lot lower often. Anyway, if you want to check that out, that's on the website. This is the HERS fire. I was talking about kind of slash and clear cuts and how those areas burned hotter in HERS. This is inside the HERS. It's all burned in HERS. And the same thing happened in the car fire, where we had these kind of steep clear cuts. Anyway, we'll put more up on the, we'll do some more writing on this fire on the Lookout. If you want to check it out, it's great. While you're there, check out our sponsor, QTAC, and drop us a donation if you want to keep seeing this stuff happen. And like Troy Corliss said about the points around Prop 4, I will do some writing on that. Anyway, thank you all for supporting us. And I'm going to be taking a sabbatical from work towards the end of the year here to do some more stuff on Lookout stuff. So I'll see you a little more, y'all. Thanks a lot. Bye. Podum Creek. It's not there yet. I don't know if you know Adam and Pascal, but yeah, it's still a long ways off. Here's Fender's Ferry. Coming up, you go over the top here, and as of kind of 2 in the morning, it was just kind of above Madrone Campground. It hadn't gotten up like over the grade down into Podum Creek. Here's Podum Creek Falls down here. If it gets there, it's not getting there in a hurry. And I think the folks that live along this road, they'll have some time to prep and they'll have some resources there. But I think this fire is mainly going to kind of move to the north for quite a while.